When my son told me to leave my own house, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding the same keys I once handed him on his wedding day. The walls that had heard his laughter now echoed with silence. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, her eyes cold and tired of pretending. "Mom, it's better if you find your own place," he said. My heart didn't break in that moment. It folded quietly, like a letter no one wanted to read anymore. I looked around the living room at the family photos I had dusted every morning. The couch I had bought for them when they first moved in. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt like mine anymore. I smiled instead of crying. "All right, son," I whispered. "If that's what you want." As I walked out the door, I didn't take much, just my handbag, a few old photographs, and the house papers I had kept safely in a blue folder. He didn't notice that part, but he would soon because the name on that new deed wasn't his. It was mine. Before that day, my life revolved around simple joys. I woke up early, just as the light touched the curtains, and brewed tea in the same kettle I had used since my husband was alive. The house always smelled of cardamom and toasted bread in the mornings. I liked it that way, warm, calm, predictable. My son, Daniel, would come downstairs rubbing his eyes, pretending he wasn't still half asleep. And I would tease him for it. For years, it was just the two of us. After his father passed away, Daniel became both my reason to live and my greatest comfort. He was gentle, quiet, and thoughtful, the kind of boy who used to leave sticky notes on the fridge saying, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll make you proud." And he did. He studied hard, got a good job, and started earning enough to make his own choices. When he told me he was getting married, I was so happy I could hardly sleep that night. I imagined laughter filling the house again, someone calling me Mom with affection, and maybe even the sound of little feet running down the hallway one day. Her name was Emma. The first time he brought her home, she smiled politely, a little too carefully, the way people do when they're unsure of what's expected. She was elegant, dressed neatly, her perfume faint and expensive. I liked her at once, or maybe I wanted to like her. In those early days, everything felt perfect. We would have dinner together, the three of us, sitting around the wooden dining table Daniel had bought secondhand. I'd serve them stew or roast chicken, and Daniel would tell stories from work, making Emma laugh. I remember thinking, maybe my home finally feels complete again. I tried to give them space. Newlyweds need that. I'd spend most of my afternoons in the garden, trimming the rose bushes or reading old letters from my husband. But sometimes I caught Emma watching me, not in a cruel way, just distant. Like she wasn't sure why I was still there. At first, it was small things. She would change the living room curtains without asking, rearrange the kitchen cabinets, replace my floral teacups with plain white ones. I didn't mind. Every woman wants to make a home her own. But the small changes slowly became a quiet wall between us. Then came the whispers of space. "Mom, maybe you should rest more upstairs," Daniel would say, gently, when Emma wanted to host her friends. Or, "You don't have to cook every day, Mom. Emma loves trying new recipes." I smiled through it all, convincing myself that it was only adjustment. A mother must know when to step back. But deep down, a small ache began to grow. I'd hear them talking late at night, muffled words through thin walls, and sometimes my name would come up. I tried not to listen, but once I couldn't help it. "She means well," Daniel said softly. "I know," Emma replied, "but it feels like we're living in her house, not ours." That line stayed with me for weeks. I began to move more quietly, avoiding being in the same room for too long. I made tea for 2 instead of 3. I folded their laundry and left it outside their door. I even started sleeping earlier, though sleep rarely came easily anymore. Still, there were good days too. Daniel would take me for drives on Sunday mornings. We passed the same bakery by Raisin Buns and laughed about old memories. I'd ask about his job, and he'd tell me about his projects, his promotions, his dreams. In those moments, I saw the little boy he once was, the boy who used to hold my hand in crowded markets. I clung to those moments like air. One afternoon, Daniel came home with papers, the house documents. He said he wanted to update the ownership for legal reasons. He promised it was just a precaution. Something about making things easier in case anything happened to me. I trusted him completely. After all, he was my son. I signed without reading much, only asking softly, "You'll keep this house safe, won't you?" He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Always, Mom." For a while, things went back to normal. Or maybe I just stopped noticing the cracks. Then, one evening, I overheard something that made my hands tremble. Emma was on the phone, speaking to someone, maybe her mother, maybe a friend, her tone sharp and impatient. "She still hasn't moved out. I can't live like this forever." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with questions. Had I overstayed my welcome? Was my presence really a burden? I thought about leaving many times, packing my small suitcase and finding a quiet place to rent nearby. But each time, I stopped myself. This was my home, the place I had built with my husband, brick by brick, memory by memory. A few days later, Daniel noticed I'd been quiet. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked, sitting beside me. "I'm fine, son," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He squeezed my hand gently, and for a second, I believed everything would be okay. But deep inside, I knew something was shifting, not just in the walls of the house, but in the space between our hearts. I didn't blame Emma entirely. Marriage changes things. Love pulls people in new directions. But what I didn't realize then was that love, when unguarded, can sometimes erase the very people who gave it birth. And while I still cooked, watered the plants, and folded their clothes, I began to feel like a guest in my own home. A quiet shadow who smiled too often and spoke too little. What I didn't know was that this peace, this fragile balance I tried so hard to protect, was about to shatter completely. The day he asked me to leave wasn't sudden. It was a slow result of moments I had ignored, small signs, small silences, and my own refusal to believe that my son could ever forget how much I loved him. But love, I would soon learn, sometimes needs to be reminded, not through words, but through truth, and the truth was written on a paper neither of them had really read. A paper that still carried my name. The days that followed were quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet I once loved. It was the kind that made every sound feel sharp, the clinking of plates, the ticking of the wall clock, the closing of a door. Silence had moved into our home, and it spoke louder than any argument could. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Emma was simply adjusting, I told myself. Daniel was busy with work. But when you live long enough with someone, you start noticing what words alone can't hide. It was in the way she sighed when I entered the room, the way Daniel's laughter softened the moment I joined their conversation, the way they shared glances that said, "She's here again." One evening, I made dinner like I always did: chicken curry, soft rice, and a small bowl of salad. I set the table neatly, just as my mother had taught me. When Daniel and Emma came home, they looked tired. I smiled, hoping a warm meal might ease the mood. But Emma glanced at the dishes and said, "Oh, we actually picked up food on the way." "You didn't have to cook, Mom." I froze, holding the spoon midair. "It's all right," I said softly. "You can eat later." Daniel smiled weakly, kissed my cheek, and said, "Thank you, Mom." Then they went upstairs, leaving the food untouched. I sat there for a while, staring at the table for three. The curry was still steaming, and the candle-eyed lid was burning too quickly, like it wanted to escape the room. When the flame finally died out, I whispered to myself, "At least I tried." The next morning, I woke up early as always. I cleaned the kitchen, watered the plants, and opened the windows to let in fresh air. But when I looked outside, I saw a moving truck parked in the driveway. Two men were carrying boxes labeled storage. Daniel stood beside them, holding a clipboard. My heart skipped. "What's happening?" I asked, stepping outside. He looked surprised. "Oh, Mom, we're just moving some of the old things to make space." "Don't worry." I looked closer. They were carrying my things. The rocking chair I'd used since Daniel was a baby. The chest where I kept his childhood drawings. "Daniel," I said quietly, "those are not old things." He smiled awkwardly. "It's just temporary, Mom. Emma wants to redecorate the living room. We'll bring them back later." That night, I sat in my now empty corner, the one where I used to read. The walls looked bare. The air felt different. I held one of the few things I still had, a photo frame of Daniel's first day at school, his missing front tooth, his bright smile, his tiny backpack. I touched the glass gently and whispered, "You promised to make me proud." Weeks passed, and little by little, I disappeared from the rhythm of their life. Emma started cooking, not that I minded, but she didn't want me in the kitchen anymore. "You've done enough all your life," she'd say, smiling tightly. "Let me take care of this." It was kindness with a wall behind it. Soon after, she suggested hiring a cleaner. "But I'm home all day," I said. "I know," she replied, "but we don't want you to tire yourself out." I understood what she really meant. "We don't want you in our way." Daniel went along with everything, though I could see it wasn't easy for him. He wasn't cruel, just caught between two loyalties, trying to make everyone happy. But sometimes, trying to please everyone means you lose sight of who you're hurting most. The real hurt came one Sunday morning. I was sitting in the garden, pruning my roses, when I overheard their conversation through the open window. "Emma? She's my mother," Daniel said. His tone was low but tense. "I know, Daniel," she replied, "but we need our own life. You said it yourself, she's getting older. She needs a smaller place. Don't you think she deserves her peace?" There was a pause. "I just don't want to hurt her," he said. "She'll understand," Emma answered. "She always does." She was right. I did understand. But understanding doesn't stop pain. Later that day, Daniel came to sit with me in the garden. The air smelled of wet soil and jasmine. He smiled gently and said, "Mom, do you ever think about moving somewhere quieter? Maybe closer to Aunt May's town? You'd have friends there." I looked at him for a long time. "Is this about Emma?" He shook his head quickly. No, it's just that. You spent your life taking care of everyone else. Maybe now it's time to take care of yourself." I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "That's a beautiful thought, Daniel." But when he walked back inside, my hands trembled. I had spent my whole life taking care of others, my husband, my son, even his wife. And now that same care was being used as a reason to send me away. The humiliation grew quietly. Once, Emma hosted a dinner party for her friends. I stayed upstairs to give them space. Halfway through, I came down to get some water. As I passed the dining room, one of her friends whispered, "Is that your maid?" Emma laughed softly and said, "Oh no, that's Daniel's mom. She just likes helping around." The words cut deeper than I expected. I didn't say anything, just smiled faintly and went back upstairs, clutching the glass of water like it was the only thing keeping me from breaking. That night, I sat on my bed and cried silently, not loud sobs, just the kind that come in waves, slow and heavy. I miss my husband. I miss the way Daniel used to hug me without needing a reason. I missed feeling like I belonged. Still, I couldn't bring myself to hate Emma. I believe she truly loved my son, and maybe she didn't realize how her small actions hurt me. Maybe she thought I was strong enough to handle it all. Then came the final straw. It was a rainy afternoon when Emma asked to speak with me privately. We sat at the kitchen table, the one I had polished every week for years. "Mom," she began gently, "Daniel and I have been thinking. This house feels crowded and we both need some privacy. There's a retirement community nearby. It's quiet, safe, and they have beautiful gardens. We could help you move there." Her words were polite, careful, and perfectly rehearsed, but they still hit me like thunder. I smiled faintly and said, "You want me to leave?" She hesitated. No, it's not that." "It is," I interrupted softly. "And it's all right, dear. I understand." That evening, Daniel came home, looking nervous. I knew Emma had already spoken to him. He stood by the living room door, his voice trembling just slightly. "Mom, we think it might be best for you to have your own space. You've done so much for us, but it's time for you to relax now. We'll take care of everything." I looked at him, really looked. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. The little boy who once clung to my sorry when thunder scared him now couldn't face his own mother. I smiled again, as if smiles could hide heartbreak. "Of course, Daniel," I said. "If that's what you want." He hugged me awkwardly, like he was comforting himself, not me. "You'll be happy, Mom. I promise." That night, I packed my suitcase, just a few clothes, some jewelry, old letters, and the blue folder that held the new deed papers. My husband and I had transferred ownership quietly years ago, ensuring that no one could take it from me. I never thought I'd need to use it this way. The rain fell hard outside, tapping against the window like someone trying to stop me. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to the empty room, "Maybe this is how mothers end." Not with anger, but with silence. When morning came, Daniel stood by the door, helping me carry my bag. "Emma handed me a small envelope for your expenses," she said, her tone polite, her smile thin. As I stepped outside, I turned one last time. The home I built, the garden I planted, the kitchen that smelled of my husband's favorite tea. All of it stood behind me like a memory I was being forced to forget. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I just walked away, the blue folder pressed against my heart. A secret between me and the man I once loved, the man who had known, even back then, that I might one day need it. They thought they were sending me away from their home. But soon, they would learn the truth, that the home had always been mine. The morning I left didn't feel like any other morning. It felt like the end of something sacred. The air was heavy, and even the light seemed unsure if it should enter the house. I woke up before the alarm, sat on the edge of my bed, and watched the first gray hint of dawn crawl across the floorboards. My packed suitcase waited beside me like a quiet witness. Downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, Daniel and Emma whispering in the kitchen. Their tone was low, but I could tell it wasn't a happy conversation. Maybe he was trying to make her understand. Maybe he was struggling with guilt. Or maybe they were just making sure everything went smoothly once I was gone. I folded the blanket one last time and ran my hand across the bedsheet. My husband's photograph sat on the bedside table. His smile still had that calm strength I used to lean on. I picked it up and whispered, "I hope I'm doing the right thing, love. You know what to say." Then, I placed the frame in my bag and took a deep breath. My knees ached as I stood. But it wasn't just age. It was the weight of memories pressing down on me. Every wall in that house held a story. Daniel's first steps near the hallway, his birthday balloons that once brushed against the ceiling, The laughter that used to fill the dining room when my husband was alive. Now, all that remained was silence, the kind that followed after love had been stretched thin. When I walked downstairs, Daniel looked startled. He was holding a cup of coffee, but his hands were trembling slightly. Emma stood behind him, dressed neatly as always, her hair tied back. Expression composed but distant. "You're up early, Mom," Daniel said softly. "I couldn't sleep," I replied. My voice didn't shake, but my heart did. There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when everyone knows what's about to be said, but no one wants to be the one to say it. Finally, Emma spoke first. "Mom, the taxi will be here soon. We already booked a room for you near the retirement community. It's a lovely place, quiet and safe," I nodded. "That's thoughtful of you," Daniel tried to smile. "You'll be happy there, Mom. You deserve peace now." Peace? The word sounded strange, like they were offering me something they had already taken away. "I'll be fine," I said, reaching for my coat. "You don't have to worry." He moved toward me quickly, taking the suitcase from my hand. "At least let me carry this for you." I let him, not because I needed the help, but because I wanted him to feel useful even now. A mother's heart doesn't stop caring, even when it's breaking. When we stepped outside, the morning air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. The garden was still wet from last night's drizzle. My roses, the ones I had planted with my husband, were glistening with dew. For a moment, I wanted to bend down and touch them, but I knew if I did, I might not be able to stand again. The taxi pulled up, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. The driver stepped out and opened the trunk. Daniel loaded my suitcase and Emma handed me an umbrella. "You might need this," she said politely. "Thank you," I replied, forcing a gentle smile. Then, just before I stepped into the car, I turned to look at Daniel. For a second, he looked like a little boy again, lost, unsure. The same boy who once cried when I left him on his first day of school. I wanted to hug him to tell him it was all right, that mothers never stop loving. But I did in single quotes t. Instead, I placed my hand on his cheek and said softly, "Take care of her, and take care of yourself." He nodded quickly, eyes glossy but refusing to let the tears fall. "I will, Mom. I promise." Then I got into the car, closed the door, and watched my home grow smaller through the window as the taxi pulled away. I didn't cry. Not then. My tears had already been spent in the silence of too many nights. What I felt instead was emptiness, a kind that didn't ache or burn, just existed. The drive was long and quiet. The driver tried to make small talk, asking if I was going to visit family. I smiled politely and said, something like that. He must have sensed the heaviness in my tone, because he stopped asking questions. I watched the city blur past, the shops, the parks, the same grocery store where I used to take Daniel as a child. Everything looked familiar, yet painfully distant. When we reached the small inn Emma had booked for me, I paid the driver and thanked him. The room was simple but clean. A bed, a window overlooking a park, a kettle, and a small television mounted on the wall. I placed my suitcase near the corner and sat down. The silence returned, but this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not cruel, just real. For the first time in months, I was alone, truly alone, without the need to pretend I was fine. I unpacked slowly, placing the framed photo of my husband on the bedside table. "We did it," I whispered to him. "We gave him everything, and now, it's time to let go." But letting go, I realized, doesn't happen in a day. It happens in moments, quiet, invisible moments when you breathe and choose not to look back. For the next few days, Daniel called me every morning. His voice was cheerful, maybe too cheerful. "How are you settling in, Mom?" He'd ask. "I'm fine, dear," I'd say. "The park here is lovely." "That's good," he'd reply quickly, as if reassuring himself. Emma called once too. Her tone was polite, distant. "I hope we're comfortable, Mom. Let us know if you need anything." "I'm fine," I said again. "Thank you." But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. There was still something unfinished, something he needed to see. A week later, Daniel came to visit. He brought groceries, flowers, and that nervous smile he wore when he didn't know what to say. We had tea together by the window. He told me about work, about Emma's new project, about everything except the silence between us. After a while, he asked gently, "Mom, are you sure you're okay here? You sound lonely." I smiled faintly. Loneliness isn't new to mothers, Daniel. We learn it quietly, when our children first walk away, when they first love someone else, when they stop needing us. "It's not your fault." He looked down at his cup, guilt washing over his face. "I just wanted you to have peace, I know," I said softly. "But peace doesn't come from places, my son. It comes from people." He didn't answer when he left that evening. I walked him to the door. "Drive safe," I said. "And don't forget to water the plants. They like attention." He smiled weakly. I won't forget, after he left, I sat for a long time with the blue folder open in front of me. The papers were still there, the deed my husband had insisted we update years ago. It clearly stated that the property belonged solely to me. I had kept it safe all these years, never once thinking it would matter. But now, as I traced my finger over my name, I realized it was time. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of truth. Sometimes, people only wake up when life gently shakes them the next morning. I called Daniel and asked him to visit. There's something important I want to show you, I said. He arrived in the evening, looking worried. What's wrong, Mom? Nothing's wrong, I replied calmly. I just want to share something with you. I handed him the blue folder. He opened it, his brow furrowing as he read the papers inside. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, he looked up at me, eyes wide with disbelief. Mom, this says the house is in your name. Yes, I said gently. Your father and I made sure of it. He wanted to protect me in case life became unkind. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked like a child again, lost in a lesson he hadn't studied for. Why didn't you tell me? He finally whispered. Because I never wanted you to feel small in your own home, I said. I wanted you to build your life freely. But when you asked me to leave, I realized sometimes love needs boundaries too. He sank into the chair, covering his face with his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I placed my hand gently over his. I know, Daniel, you didn't mean harm. You were just trying to be a good husband. But in doing that, you forgot what it means to be a son. Tears filled his eyes. And for the first time in years, he didn't hide them. I can't believe I did this to you. Love makes us blind sometimes, I said quietly. But the good thing about blindness is it can be cured. You just need to open your eyes again. He looked at me with the kind of sorrow that only comes when someone finally sees the damage they've done. Can you ever forgive me? I smiled faintly. I already did, Daniel. The day I walked out, I forgave you. I just needed you to see it for yourself. He nodded, still trembling. I want you to come home, Mom, please, it's your house. You belong there. I hesitated, looking out the window where the first drops of rain began to fall. Home isn't walls and roofs, Daniel. It's where hearts learn to be kind again. If you truly want me back, promise me one thing, anything, he said quickly. Promise me you'll never let pride come before love. Not with me, not with anyone. He took my hand and whispered. I promised, and in that moment, just as thunder rolled softly in the distance, I knew that my son, the little boy who once held my hand at the market, had finally found his way back to me. Daniel sat there a long time, the folder still open on his lap. The evening light from the window touched the edge of the papers, turning the ink to soft gold. He kept reading the same line again and again, as if a different meaning might appear. I can't believe I asked you to leave your own house, he whispered. His voice cracked on the word your. I watched him quietly. His shoulders were trembling, his hands gripping the papers as though he could squeeze time backward. I didn't want you to feel guilty, I said at last. I only wanted you to understand what this house really meant. It wasn't about bricks and wood, Daniel. It was about love, the kind that built it. He looked up, eyes red. I thought I was protecting Emma, keeping peace. But I see now I was just trying to avoid conflict. I hurt you because I was afraid to disappoint someone else. That's how families fall apart, I said softly. Not because people stop loving each other, but because they stop speaking the truth, he nodded. Silent tears running down his face. For a moment we simply sat there, no sound except the faint tick of the wall clock, and the rain beginning again outside. That night, Daniel stayed with me at the inn. He didn't say much after that. He made tea, the way I used to, just strong, a little bitter, and placed a cup on the table beside me. When I thanked him, he said quietly, it's the least I can do. We sat by the window, watching the rain wash the streets clean. Street lamps shimmered in puddles. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistled. Mom, he said suddenly, can I ask you something? Of course. When Dad passed away, were you ever angry? At him, I mean. For leaving you alone? I thought for a while. No, I said slowly. I was never angry, just lost. But I learned that love isn't about who stays. It's about what they leave behind for you to hold on to, he nodded, staring at the steam rising from his cup. You left me everything. And I didn't see it. You see it now, I said, placing my hand on his. That's enough. The next morning, Daniel left early to talk with Emma. I didn't ask what he would say. Some conversations have to happen behind closed doors. When he called later that evening, his voice was tired but lighter somehow. She cried, he said. She said she never meant to push you away. She thought she was doing what was best for me, for us, I think. She finally understands. That's good, I answered. Understanding is the first step. The rest takes time. Can I come get you tomorrow? He asked quickly. I want you to come home. Home? I repeated the word softly, tasting it like something I hadn't said in months. Let's see how tomorrow feels, Daniel. The next day was bright and clear. After breakfast, I folded the few clothes I had unpacked and slipped the blue folder back into my bag. When Daniel arrived, he looked different, older somehow, not in years but in wisdom. He opened the car door for me like a gentleman and smiled shyly. Ready? The drive felt long but peaceful. We didn't talk much. I watched the trees blur past, sunlight glinting off the windshield. The same road that had once carried me away from my home was now taking me back. But everything in me felt changed. When we reached the house, I hesitated at the gate. The roses had grown taller, welled even, and the grass was sprinkled with tiny white flowers. They missed you, Daniel said with a small grin inside. The familiar scent of wood polish and lemon soap greeted me. Emma was standing in the living room, hands clasped nervously. When our eyes met, she looked down, tears already gathering. Mom, she said softly. I don't know where to start. Start with hello. I replied. She let out a shaky laugh. Hello, she whispered, and then she stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't a perfect hug, it was uncertain, trembling. But it was real. I felt her heartbeat against my shoulder, and for the first time, I believed her regret. I never wanted to hurt you, she murmured. I wanted to build something of my own. And I forgot that you were the one who built the foundation. I smiled faintly. We all forget things when we're busy building. When she pulled away, Daniel stood behind her, his arm around her shoulders. His eyes met mine. Mom, if you'll let us, we want to make it right. That evening, the three of us sat together at the same dining table that had once felt like a battlefield. The air was gentler now. Emma cooked and Daniel insisted I sit. He served the food himself, not grandly, just quietly. The way love speaks when it no longer needs to prove itself. We ate slowly, talking about ordinary things, the garden, the weather, his work. But beneath every sentence ran a current of unspoken apology and renewed affection. At one point, Emma reached for the serving bowl and said, Mom, your curry always had a secret ingredient. What was it? Patience, I said with a smile, and a little bit of love when no one's watching. She laughed through her tears. I'll never forget that. After dinner, Daniel brought out the same blue folder and placed it in the middle of the table. Mom, he said, I want you to keep this. I know it's already yours, but I need the reminder every day. You built this home, and we'll never forget that again. I didn't open it. I just covered his hand with mine. Keep it safe, Daniel. Not for the papers, for what they mean. Later that night, I went upstairs to my room. Everything was just as I'd left it, the embroidered cushions, the soft yellow curtains, even the faint smell of lavender. Yet somehow it all felt new again. I sat by the window and looked out at the garden. The moon was bright, silver light pouring over the roses. I thought of my husband and whispered, he's home again. A gentle knock came at the door. Daniel peeked in, holding 2 cups of tea. I made it the right way this time, he said sheepishly. I laughed softly. Come in. He sat beside me, handing me the cup. The tea was warm, perfectly balanced. For a while we drank in silence. Then he said, Mom, when you forgave me, why didn't you yell or get angry? I deserved it because anger only burns the one who carries it, I said quietly. And I was already carrying enough. He nodded slowly. I don't think I can ever repay you. You already have, I whispered. You came back. He leaned his head on my shoulder like he used to when he was small. I love you, Mom. I know, I said. I never stopped knowing. The clock ticked softly, marking a rhythm of healing that words could never capture. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees and somewhere deep inside the house, peace finally returned to stay. The next morning began with light. Real, living light that filled the corners of the house again. I woke early, drawn by the smell of coffee. Daniel's coffee, strong and slightly burnt. It was a small, wonderful mistake that made me smile. When I went downstairs, he was already there in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, trying to flip pancakes while Emma set the table. They looked like 2 children caught playing in someone else's room. Good morning, Mom, Emma said quickly. We thought we'd surprise you. You did, I said, laughing softly. Though I'm not sure those pancakes will survive. Daniel grinned sheepishly. They'll taste better with your touch. So, the 3 of us cooked together. There was clattering, laughter, and the smell of butter filling the air. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet everything felt new, like the house itself was breathing again. After breakfast, Emma went to water the garden and Daniel asked if we could take a walk. The path behind her house led down toward the small lake, where he'd learned to ride his bike years ago. The air was fresh, the sky full of small white clouds drifting lazily. Mom, he began, his voice steady this time. I've been thinking about everything, about how easy it is to take love for granted, when it's always there. You gave me everything, and I treated it like it would never end. I didn't interrupt him. I just listened to the sound of his shoes brushing the gravel. I kept asking myself why you didn't fight back, he went on. Why you just walked away. And now I understand you weren't giving up. You were giving me space to see what I'd done. That's the hardest part of love, I said. Sometimes you have to step aside to let someone grow. He stopped walking and looked at me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. You deserve the chance to be better, I answered. That's what forgiveness really is. He nodded, eyes glistening. Then I'll spend the rest of my life earning it over the following weeks. The house slowly filled with warmth again. Emma began to include me in small things, asking for recipes, inviting me to go shopping, leaving tea by my door in the mornings. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was something gentler. Respect. Maybe. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen staring at an old photo album. You look so young here, she said, pointing at my wedding picture. I was younger, I laughed. But not wiser. She turned a page and smiled. Daniel's smile hasn't changed, no, I said softly. But his eyes have. They see more now. Emma closed the album carefully. I hope someday our children look at me the way he looks at you. They will, I said. If you love them the way you love him and if you forgive as easily as you ask to be forgiven. She nodded, tears glimmering. For the first time, I felt she wasn't my rival for Daniel's affection. She was the woman who would continue the love story I had started. On Sunday evenings, we started a new ritual. After dinner, we'd sit in the living room with cups of tea and share one story each, something from the past, something we'd learned, or simply something we wanted the others to know. One evening, Daniel said, when I was little, I used to dream of buying you a big house with a garden. I smiled. You do better than that. You made us want a home again, Emma said quietly. And you made me understand what it means to belong to a family. The three of us sat there, the clock ticking softly in the background, and for once no one needed to say more. The silence was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. A few months later, life settled into its natural rhythm. Daniel and Emma both worked during the day, and I spent my mornings tending the garden, trimming the roses, humming songs my mother once sang. Neighbors began visiting again. They said the house seemed brighter. Maybe it was. Maybe forgiveness has its own kind of light. One afternoon, Daniel came home with a small box. For you, he said, handing it to me. Inside was a golden key on a simple chain. It's for the house, he explained. I know you already have the real keys, but I wanted you to have this one as a reminder. You'll never be locked out again. My throat tightened. Thank you, my son. He hugged me, the way he used to when he was a boy, arms tight, head pressed against my shoulder. I love you, he whispered again. Later that night, as I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the floor, I thought of the journey we had taken, the silence, the hurt, the leaving, the return. I realized something simple yet powerful. Love doesn't end when it's broken. It waits, quietly, for a chance to be mended. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about giving it a softer ending. The next morning, I went into the garden early. The air smelled of dew and earth. The roses were blooming wildly, petals heavy with life. I touched one and whispered, we made it through the storm. Behind me, Daniel's voice called, Mom. Breakfast's ready. I turned, smiling. Coming. And for the first time in what felt like years, I said it without sadness. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card. To Mom. Thank you for never closing the door. Even when we did, I couldn't speak. I just reached out and held her hand. Families are messy, I said quietly. We break, we heal, we learn. What matters is that we keep coming back to the table. Daniel nodded. And this time, we won't forget who built the table in the first place. We watched the sky turn from gold to pink to deep violet. A flock of birds flew overhead, heading home. I smiled. They always know where to return, I said. So do we? Daniel replied. The house behind us glowed softly, its windows catching the last light of day. Inside, the clock ticked steadily, keeping time with the heartbeat of a family that had found its rhythm again. The years have softened since that day. The bitterness that once filled the corners of my heart has faded into something gentler. Like the aftertaste of strong tea, warm but steady. Life has a way of teaching us what no book ever can. That love, once given freely, never really leaves. It just changes shape. Some evenings when the house grows quiet again, I sit by the same window where I once cried alone. The garden outside is full of color now, roses, marigolds, and a small patch of lilies that Daniel planted himself. I hear laughter from the kitchen, the clinking of plates. And I realized something precious. This home, once filled with silence and pride, now breathes again. Forgiveness didn't happen in one day. It came in small moments. In Emma's hesitant smiles. In Daniel's simple gestures, a cup of tea left by my door. The sound of him humming as he worked in the garden. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain. Sometimes I still think about that morning when they asked me to leave. I can see it clearly. Daniel's uncertain eyes, Emma's tense shoulders, my trembling hands. But when I remember it now, I don't feel hurt. I feel grateful. Because that was the day we all began to grow. I've learned that love needs truth to survive. Silence, even when meant to keep the peace, can build walls higher than anger ever could. I wish I had spoken earlier, told Daniel how I felt instead of smiling through my hurt. But perhaps we all need to lose our way once before we understand where home really is. One evening, as we sat in the living room with the lamps dimmed, Daniel said quietly, "Mom, I still think about what I did. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself completely." I smiled and reached for his hand. "You don't have to carry guilt forever, my son. The moment you chose to change, forgiveness was already there waiting for you." He looked at me and whispered, "You're stronger than I'll ever be." "No," I said softly. "I just loved longer." He didn't answer, but the way he held my hand said more than words ever could. Now, when neighbors come by, they often say the house feels warm. I tell them it isn't the paint or the furniture, it's the people. A house is just a building. A home is built from second chances. Every morning, I still water the roses. Sometimes Emma joins me. We talk about small things, the weather, the meals we'll cook, the children they dream of having. She calls me mom now, not out of obligation, but out of love. And when she does, I feel a quiet peace inside me. I often think of my husband. I imagine him smiling somewhere beyond this world, proud of how our story turned out. He always said, "You can't lose what's built on love." And he was right. Looking back, I understand something I didn't before. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest form. It doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. If you ask me today what I've learned from it all, I'd say this. Family isn't about perfection. It's about choosing love again and again, even when it's hard. It's about letting go of pride before it poisons your heart. And it's about believing that no matter how lost we become, kindness can still find the way home. As the sun sets beyond the garden, I close my eyes and breathe deeply. The air smells of rain and jasmine. Somewhere inside, I hear my son laughing, a sound I once feared I'd never hear again. And in that moment, I whisper a quiet prayer of thanks. For lessons learned. For wounds healed. For love that refused to die. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't that people change. It's that love, even after being broken, finds the courage to begin again.